This is Studio 809.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Outdoors Hiking Bob podcast. I'm your host, Hiking Bob Falcone. You can find me on my website at hikingbob.com, which has links to my social media, my columns at the Colorado Springs Independent, the other podcasts we've done, my photography website, and also there's a link there where you can send me an email or subscribe to my newsletter. Always looking for good suggestions or ideas for topics or guests to have on the podcast, so feel free to drop me a line or sign up for my newsletter because there's a lot of stuff on there that just doesn't get covered either in my columns at the Indy or on the podcast, or if there's an update that something comes up after a podcast goes live. So visit me at hikingbob.com. Today I have a very special guest. My guest is Mayor Yemi Mobolade, who is the newest mayor of Colorado Springs, got sworn in early June.
Yes, sir.
And so excited to have you on, and thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Bob, it's an honor to be on your podcast.
Well, the honor is definitely all mine.
And the reason why I say it's an honor is just because I know of your leadership and how you've leveraged your own influence to move the conversation forward in our community. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate that, and thank you so much. It's been great having the opportunity to just represent the community and be the voice of the community out there. So it's something I take seriously and enjoy doing. You've been in office for just a few months, and
I think 2 months, 2.5, something-ish. Around there.
Yeah, it's not been a long time.
No, it's been a busy 2 months, though.
Yeah, I've been to at least one of your news conferences, and that was great. You know, you took questions from the news media, including myself at that, and appreciate that you've been pretty open and available to the public and to the media to talk about issues. And I know that the first few months is, you're trying to get your feet wet. No matter, I get the impression no matter how much prep you do while running for office, and you're not new to city government, having been with the Chamber of Commerce,
right,
that it's still a whole lot of, boy, I didn't know all this.
Right. And I also should mention I'm not new to city admin. That actually we're here at the mayor's conference room, and my office when I worked here was just right by the conference room,
right out the other door.
So it truly has made the transition fairly seamless, because the leaders that I get to work with are all former colleagues of mine. In fact, as I make my rounds to all the divisions and departments, sometimes they have signs that says "Welcome back."
Oh, cool!
So yeah, it's been a joy to come back in a different capacity,
sure, and
in a capacity that gives me the bully pulpit to actually truly make a difference.
Cool.
Yeah.
Great. And it's been exciting times having you come in here and kind of a different change in philosophy, it seems, from the previous. I think I'm of the opinion that the last 8 years under Mayor Suthers was pretty successful for the city, and a lot of good things happened.
Absolutely.
Definitely, my personal opinion, a big change from the previous administration before him. But now we're kind of changing. I guess the best way we're changing the direction a little bit of the city. Would that be an accurate description with your administration?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say we are continuing I get the honor of continuing in the legacy of former leaders and mayors before me, and so we are moving it in the right direction as opposed to changing the direction. Because some of what John Suthers did well around his just being attentive to our infrastructure needs are things that will continue. But as I think about where we're at in our city's history, you and I were talking about we're no longer a small city. This was before the podcast started. And to grow, city leadership has to grow. And what the community is asking for is for the city leaders, for the mayor to be more present in their neighborhoods. They want to be a part of the decision-making process, and that's probably one of the uniqueness that I bring to this office.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. So, you talked about infrastructure, and I was looking at your solutions team board that's over there, and you've talked about that a lot in the media about your solutions team. You're looking at different things, and since we're all about my podcast and my columns all about outdoor recreation and parks and recreation and stuff like that, I guess I want to kind of focus on that topic a little bit.
Yeah.
You have up there two things that jumped out at me: economic vitality and infrastructure.
Right.
in your opinion, where does our city's parks and trails fall into? Is it economic vitality? Is it infrastructure?
That's a great question.
Where is that?
And in fact, to the listeners, they don't know what we're looking at. So there's 4 different items, and so economic vitality, housing, infrastructure, and public safety. And I have teams of leaders across the city who are convening. Actually, that kicked off yesterday.
Right.
Who are bringing their best imagination and offering solutions to the mayor, me. Where does parks fit in? Actually, parks fit in 3 of the 4.
Okay.
So it's, yes, economic vitality. I'm an economic developer by trade. And one of the reasons people decide to come to this city, like me and probably you and so many people, like General Palmer, is because of the beauty of our trails and open spaces in our park system. The second one, infrastructure, it's and we can talk more about that, but it's a core infrastructure for our city. And as mayor, I'm tasked with delivering on a great infrastructure. And the third one you didn't mention is actually public safety.
Right.
So the
I
public
was going to get to that a little later.
the public safety of our trail system is of great importance to me as well.
Okay. So we go back in the history of the city. Let's just go back in recent history, past 25 years. Let's give it that. Not even that far back. We had a pretty deep recession in the mid 2000s, around 2008, and a lot of departments in the city, and particularly the Parks Department, took a very significant cut in their funding.
Right.
And to be honest, that's been a long time.
Right.
And while the staffing at the Parks Department is back to finally pre-recession levels, funding still is not to that level. And there have been efforts over the last 8 years where there were Tabor retention votes to throw money back in there, but that's not long-term funding, and that's very specific for we want this project, we want that project, and the voters have been gracious to allow that to happen. My question for you is, do you have a plan, or is there a plan to get the general fund support for the Parks and Rec Department back to, at the very least, pre-recession levels?
Yeah. My answer is multifaceted.
Okay, fair enough.
So the short of the answer is yes.
Okay,
it's always been part of my plan. When I think of my work as mayor, and by law, I'm tasked with providing quality services to 3 areas. So around our public safety, around our infrastructure and transportation system, as well as our park system. And if you see the budget, if you look at the city budget, it's heavy on those 3 areas, because no one else has that responsibility but city government. Other things, economic development, community development, we can partner with others. So first and foremost, those 3 things are core to my job. And so trying to fund those, absolutely. And you talked about Tabor, we're kind of trying to pursue a Tabor measure for this November, and there's been conversations around, the resetting of the Tabor of the base.
Right.
That's very important, because where that hurt us back in 2008, because like many people, like many Coloradans, I love Tabor and believe in the spirit of Tabor, but the whole ratcheting down effect sets us back as a city. So that's why it took us a while to climb out of that. So so for folks that are paying attention to the conversation right now, that I go, why do they have to reset the base? Because if we don't reset the base, we come to 2025, we're starting from a place of deficit, and then we're having to cut back on our services, and that's not what I want to do as a mayor. So parks gets affected by the decisions that we make as leaders, and so it's why I'm fighting to ensure that we have a chance to also reset our revenue levels. Yeah.
Okay. So, there was the Jacob study that was done a few years ago.
Yes,
which
I'm aware of that.
We defined many millions of dollars of,
I think, like 170 million, something of that nature.
An appalling amount of money, I think. And to be fair, not everything in there is there's some stuff that's much more critical than other stuff. Some stuff pretty minor, they can wait. But it's still a large amount of backlog. There's parks that neighborhoods are waiting on that haven't been built. There's my neighborhood park, 2 of the 3 tennis courts are padlocked because they're not safe, and they're torn up, and who knows when they'll be fixed or anything like that. Does your plan? Do you have any do you have a path moving forward to try to address those issues? I mean, I get it that we're not going to come up with $170 million tomorrow. We're not going to take care of everything next year. Not a possibility. But do you have a plan where we can start taking bites out of that list of infrastructure at the Parks Department?
Bob, that's a great question, and that is the plan. The meeting I had recently with my Parks Director, we actually looked at the many needs, and what Britt Haley has done so well, and I'm really proud of her leadership, is we've consolidated that list to what the most important needs are. So in each one of these areas, one of my favorite phrases is that if you aim for everything, you aim for nothing.
Right.
So we have to begin to make decisions around what's our first tier priority and what's our second tier. So the good news is we have that list. The next step is how do we pay for it, which is the big question for us as a city. We were talking earlier about where our city is growing. We have more needs than we do funding available for the needs in each of those three areas: safety, infrastructure, and our park system. But that said, we're constantly trying to prioritize those needs. We're trying to look for grant opportunities. I think Panorama Park presents an opportunity for us to moving forward. I mean, we celebrated the opening of what a great park and a great investment, but if you look at how that all came together, it was just a wonderful fusion of city's investment, trails and open space, you too, and I think you guys put up the first dollar amount, and that triggered others. I'm looking at that as a model for some of the other needs, as opposed to just we don't have the money, because the reality is we don't have the money because funding is limited, and I want our residents to hear that our city is growing. You're asking me as mayor and city to keep up with the growth of our city. We need you to help with that. But grant funding presents an opportunity to help keep up with some of those needs.
And recognizing that, from what I understand, sales tax revenue is a little down this year.
Yeah.
We've had a number of years with huge increases in sales tax revenue. This year it's down a little bit. We have I don't want to say recession. It's not the right word.
Well, we're seeing it's slowing of the economy.
Yeah.
That's what economists are saying. Everyone's kind of hesitant to say it's a full recession, but what we're hearing is it's the slowing of the economy is happening.
Which I think is cyclical anyway.
Yes.
You have these ups and downs.
Exactly.
I don't think it's any...
Well said.
It's not any cause for, I think, panic by any stream.
Exactly.
But, we're going up now. So, obviously I'm thinking of this as a long-term solution. So is your long term, are we going to see increases in general fund support for the Parks Department over the long term?
As a candidate, I talked about, that was one of the things I ran on, and the good news is that even the former administration, they were kind of gradually bringing it back up. And if you look at it in terms of the totality of new opportunities, in terms of new grant funding sources, I would say that our actual park system is doing way better than 2008 in terms of funding. Now, what I want to be clear is that that's not something to write home about and say we're there, because in terms of what you're asking is the actual general fund,
right?
Yeah, and it's my intent to bring us back. We're not too far from that, but we have to ask ourselves the question: we get there, now what? Because our city is growing. So we need a pathway to continue to keep up with the infrastructure needs for our trails and park system. Okay.
Yeah. The perception out there is that as the city has grown a lot since 2008, and our funding isn't quite to that level, but our needs are higher. And we saw during COVID how the need, and many of us who were involved in this thought, our usage was growing even before COVID was growing.
Right.
We saw the handwriting on the wall. The only thing COVID did was take a 10-year growth and squeeze it down to about a 2-year time frame. So it greatly expanded it. So it's good to hear that there's some plan in effect or in the works, I should say would be the better word for doing that.
Right.
Well, the TOPS program just got renewed for another 20 years.
Yay.
Yeah, which is a great move.
80%?
Yeah, 79 point something.
Yeah.
Close enough for me.
Yeah.
I'll be happy to call it 80%.
That's a huge win. Let's just say that, yeah.
It's a great win. But along with that came some restrictions that the voters wanted to how that money is spent. And
is it 75% dedicated
75% of the open space
acquisition
category
of open space? Yeah.
Yeah. So and that's okay. I mean, it's the voters wanted it, and that's, the voters get what they want. So understanding that the TOPS program is still going to exist to purchase land,
Right.
kind of its primary purpose. If you go back to when it was first initiated, that's what people wanted to do.
Right.
Is there another mechanism, maybe something similar to that TOPS tax for
Right. I hear what you're saying.
purchasing land that's not necessarily constrained by the TOPS budget? If that makes if my question makes sense.
No, your question makes sense. I can't speak to the specifics of the strategy in terms of how much land we continue to acquire. I was actually happy to see that language in the ballot to ensure that we are keeping up with the growth of our city and acquiring new open spaces. So going back to our previous conversation, it's important that we care for these spaces.
Right.
Those and keep and catch up to a maintenance backlog of needs. Now, an opportunity, hopefully near future opportunity, is around LART.
Okay.
So largest automobile, rental, taxes, and ensuring that it's think of it as tourist tax. So that's not a tax that the residents pay for. That is the visitors that are putting the burden on our trail systems, and especially a place like Garden of the Gods. One of the future plans and initiative is that we pursue a LART increase. It's currently 2%. We're one of the lowest in the entire country, and we are a tourist city as well. It makes sense that as we work towards an increase of those taxes, the tourist taxes, that some of that is used to actually care for our much needed infrastructure around our parks and trails and open spaces, of which visitors also use and put in burden on. So that's a future opportunity I see around the question that you asked.
Okay. So would your proposal for a LART increase, would you put in actually the language that a specific percentage of that would have to go to parks, or would that be kind of like a flexible thing? What's your thought on that?
You're ahead of me in that. First thing first is to last week I've asked that we convene a task force.
Okay.
So before something goes on the ballot, I have to ensure the community is in agreement, because I want to make sure it passes. So the task force will be tasked with some of those efforts, because one of the things I get to tell the group is, okay, so LART traditionally is used for these purposes and these functions, especially around some of the Labor Day liftoff and some of these events that bring visitors to our community,
to our parks,
to our parks. Exactly. Well said. To our parks. So my point exactly.
Right.
But one of the things I will slip into that task force is, as we grow this event, it's important that some of this money is dedicated to our much needed infrastructure around parks. Now, to get there, there might need to be some polling and message testing and just getting a sense of the appetite in terms of what the community would say yes to. So some of those specifics will be around how close can we get there. So it could be a percentage of it is dedicated. It could be that it's just an amount, and then we figure out how to use that in the city. But as much flexibility as mayor would be really important to me, so that we can take those limited funds and then we can address the most pressing needs in our park system.
Okay. Do you think that, let me take a step back. You mentioned that this is a tax that's paid mostly by tourists.
Yes.
Not everybody who lives here necessarily going to rent a car or go stay in a hotel here in town.
Right.
I think most people rent a car usually because they had, a car accident and their insurance company's going to pay for that anyway.
Right.
Do you think it's going to be difficult to get the message to the voters that they're approving a tax that they're not necessarily going to pay?
That's a great question. It's why I started to use the language tourist tax.
Okay.
I think LART gets confusing. People wonder, sometimes people say, what's LART? Good question. I'm not a fan of acronyms to begin with.
Okay.
But I understand trying to say larger is automobile. It can be a long. But when you say LART, people go, is that something I'm paying for? So I think it's important for you and I to start saying tourist tax.
Tourist tax.
And when you look at other tourism communities, it's a lot higher. Las Vegas and other places. And if you think about the last time you went on vacation, let's say you went to, I don't know, somewhere in Utah or California, Florida, or even outside the country, maybe Mexico. When we go on vacation, for me at least, let me speak for myself. I'm not looking at the bill going, well, that extra tax. I mean, you go on vacation and you're just ready to, and you're willing and ready to spend money. You're in vacation mode. That's how people come to our city, expecting to, that's just part of the cost of vacation. So even a modest increase will go a long way to benefit our city. So that's you're asking some great questions,
Okay,
Bob.
thanks.
Yeah.
I think of when I went. One of the first things I did for myself when I retired from the fire department was I'm going to go to Hawaii. Always wanted to go to Hawaii. I'm going to Hawaii. And to be honest with you, I didn't care what it cost. And the last thing I cared about was what their tourist tax was. The number of
friends from here, from this city, that go to a place like Las Vegas, because we have direct flights from COS, from our airport. And Las Vegas has one of the highest of their own version of a LART tax, and
nobody cares.
Nobody cares.
Right.
People still going back.
I mean, I look at the bill and I gripe about it, but I'm like, oh, I'm here. I might as well,
No, so it's so Bob. Again, I'm glad you're bringing this up because this initiative might be next year. It might be in 2025, but it's important for our listeners to know that this tax is not paid by you.
Right.
It's a tourism tax, and we're one of the lowest in the country. And if we don't increase this, we are missing out on opportunities to actually care for our city and the needs that we have.
So you said that the tax is currently 2%.
It's 2%.
Do you have a ballpark where you want to aim for? Are you aiming for 3, 4, 6? What,
I don't know.
Or that's still part of that task force?
I'm going to throw out a number,
Okay.
but I asked the listeners not to hold me to it.
Okay.
I asked my predecessor, Mayor John Suthers, because he did some work around this. What's a good appetite? Something conservative enough, because Colorado Springs is still fairly a conservative city, and we have a lot of libertarians, and it's really important how government approaches things, even though it's not paid by them. We still have those values.
Right.
So a number that I've heard is 4%.
Okay.
Now, I want to explore that. Is that enough? Is that not enough? It's still very modest to compare to the 12% or 16% some other communities have, but it's a modest jump will go a long way. The key for me is, and this is what I will fight for, is to ensure that as that goes to the ballot, we have some work to do around the language in terms of how those LART dollars are used. Because right now, the way the code is written, it's not a lot. We can't use it for our park system. So as we talk about increase, it's important that we talk about changes to the code that allows us some of those funding to be able to pay for our parks.
Got it. Great. One of the other things, and looking at your solutions team, one of the other things you talked about this is public safety.
Yes.
And there is a perception
Right.
that some of our parks are not necessarily safe places.
Right.
Now, I will say that it's not necessarily an opinion I have overall, but
Right.
there are a couple of places that are a little
right,
sketchy.
yeah.
And we've got 5 new urban rangers on our
Urban
park
rangers.
system. They're kind of in the
Right.
process of getting out there now. Do you see, or do you have a plan on further taking care of the safety of people in the parks? Now, I know you're going to tell me a lot about the homeless population, and that's, I think it's a good place to start. But I also want to point out that it's not just that. It's like vehicle break-ins at
Right.
trailheads and
Right.
stuff like that. What's your goal? What's your plan on addressing safety, not only citywide, but in our park
our
system
parks.
and our trails and stuff like that?
Yeah, they're all connected. They're all connected to the fact that we're short on officers to get to a much needed strength. I love our urban rangers. I think that's a step in the right direction. By no means do we stop there. I think we have to assess the program and see how well it's working, and the connection between that program and our law enforcement officers. I think it's the homeless outreach program, the hot team, the homeless outreach team from the law enforcement. I think being able to deploy resources around safety in general, it's really important, of which parks is a big part of that, because I know people that actually ride their bikes to work every day,
Right.
year round.
Yeah.
I heard from residents in the campaign that, and I'm thankful for your fair characterization of our park system, because it's not like across the board, but there are pockets of areas that need more attention, and that's where we've deployed the resources right now. So it's my intent to stay on top of that, see if we need more, and see how we can move things around to continue to ensure the safety of our residents. That one is Bob. That one is top of my mind.
Okay.
Being a parent of young kids, and we use the park system, we use the playground. So that one feels almost personal.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
And I did a podcast some weeks ago, probably by the time this airs, it'll be about more than a month ago, about an incident I had in a park, and that I had to dial 911, and the many hours it took for police response there, and I was pretty upset about it.
As you should.
And I still am.
I know, as you should. I hear you. I hear you, Bob, and I cringe every time a resident tells me that.
Right.
Actually, it's making me emotional.
Okay.
And it's why I'm very passionate about the support of our law enforcement officers in this new training academy, because it's just not okay.
Right.
When people say they're asking for help, and help is not coming.
Okay.
And so it's really important that we strike that balance, because unfortunately the industry has become a national conversation and very political. So we're losing people.
Right.
People don't want to do the job, but we're dependent on them when we need them.
Right.
So I do want to solve that. I got emotional.
Oh, sorry about that.
I do want to solve that problem. Yeah.
And I'll just I'll pursue this just a little bit further. Way back in the 80s, up until the 80s, and this is even before I moved here, there was actually when the city was a whole lot smaller, an actual parks police department that was run out of the parks department. And eventually
I heard about that.
It got absorbed by the police department, and unfortunately kind of disappeared over the years.
Right.
Thinking really big picture, and obviously this is something that could be pretty expensive, is that a system that you might entertain in the long term? Do you think that we get to a point we need that, or you think that their current agency is capable with some support from parks rangers?
You're talking to a mayor that wants to experiment and is open to innovative ideas.
Okay.
So yeah, the sky's the limit. I have had an early conversation with Chief about that, and to just kind of plant that seed, and not that it can't be done, but one of the things we have to assess, in the spirit of just the previous conversation, with how hard it is to work around policing and the high level of accountability, and we just have to ensure that if that's the case, it puts the city at risk and for liability if we move that route. They have to have the same level of training as our law enforcement officers, which is, at the end of the day, it's an 11-month program. Or we continue to deploy the resources of our law enforcement officers into the park system. And we're the closest examples of that I can see is the HOT team.
Right.
I mean, they're not dedicated to parks, but they do show up in the downtown area team around the Monument Valley, America the Beautiful trail system. And so I'd be open to that, but doing it in such a way that we're not exposing our park officers into a huge risk and liability.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough. I wanted to throw that out there because it has been a topic of conversation.
Right.
So, I think we've covered a lot of the things that I wanted to cover.
I'm in admiration of the way you've stepped up, and I stepped up too, because I believe that this is how democracy works. It's we engage in the solutions, we engage in the future of our city. So thank you for doing your part and being a voice and a champion of our trails, open space, and park system.
I wouldn't do it if I didn't love it, and I wouldn't be here talking to you if I didn't want to make sure that your voice was heard to the people who listen to this, who are concerned about parks and recreation and stuff like that. I'm getting a signal that we have one question left, so I'm going to leave that to you. Do you have anything you want to tell the people listening who may, or that we haven't covered, that you want to cover about anything about our parks and trails?
I just say, first of all, just thank you for voting for me For those of you that vote for me, if you didn't vote for me, I want you to know that I'm here to serve you. I want also our listeners to know that I'm very pragmatic. I'm very objective in the way I approach my job. And sometimes it means I will be criticized. But what I signed up for, my job description, and my team here at the city knows it. I say it all the time. The direct services that we provide is around our public safety, our public infrastructure, and our public parks.
Great.
So you don't have to convince this mayor that he has been tasked with that responsibility. So that will always be at the forefront of my mind. I will always prioritize those over sometimes indirect services, which are also important to me, including housing, community development, and others. And sometimes there's an intersection of all those issues. But I just want to mention that I have a clear direction and a clear purpose of an understanding of also what I signed up for, and Park System Rise to the top of that. So thank you for entrusting me to serve you. We are entering harder times, I should say, but we believe we're going to rebound quickly from it. And so we're doing the hard work right now of ensuring that our continued investment, even in these hard times, is to the three main areas I just mentioned. And by the way, when you look at our budget, you see funding reflected in these three major buckets, as it should.
Great.
And so thank you again for your time and the opportunity to be with you, Bob.
Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me, and I hope that a little further down the road, when things start moving, we can have you back on and talk about how much progress we're making.
Sounds good.
Awesome.
I look forward to another panorama park project that we can all do.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Well, everybody, Mayor Yemi Mobilati, who's the mayor of Colorado Springs, and we just had him on for a great conversation about our park system, and thank you so much for being on.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, everybody, for listening to the Outdoors Hiking Bob podcast.
Before you go, did you know you can rate and review our Studio 809 podcasts? That will help us, because our egos really need to have thousands and thousands of listeners. But that helps our wonderful sponsors reach more ears too. And we do love our sponsors. So just go to Studio 809 or any individual 809 podcast in your iTunes or podcast app and click on ratings and reviews. Thanks.